have this panel in front of us today. We have assembled a cast of both professors, a grad student, and undergraduates to speak to us today on the topic of ADD and ADHD. The title of the panel is May I Have Your Attention Please, which reflects the issues that we hope that they will give us some background information on, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, which I think is going to be the main bulk of this presentation. So I'll give you a brief introduction of each of our speakers, and then we'll launch right in. First, we have Dr. Harry Perlstadt. He joins us from the University of Michigan. I am so sorry. Oh, wow. Excuse me. Michigan State University, where he's the director for the program in Bioethics, Humanities and Society, and a professor in the Department of Sociology there as well. Dr. Perlstadt's research interests include the evaluation of multi-site cluster programs, community partnerships and collaborations, and health organizations, delivery, and professions. Next up, we're going to hear from Sherry Halpern, who is a senior at the University of Pennsylvania. Sherry was integral in putting on last year's conference, the 8th Annual National Undergraduate Bioethics Conference at UPenn. She was active in the launch of the Penn Bioethics Journal, and she will graduate with honors in philosophy, politics, and economics, as well as a major in health sciences, health and societies with a concentration in bioethics. We'll then hear from Emily Anderson, who joins us as an ND alum, who is now a PhD candidate at St. Louis University at the Center for Healthcare Ethics. She received her BA in English and Anthropology with a concentration in Gender Studies from Notre Dame and a Master's of Public Health from University of Illinois, Chicago. Her area of interest includes ethical issues in health promotion, disease prevention, research with vulnerable populations, and organ donation and transplantation. We'll then hear from Mike Subialka, who you may remember from yesterday morning. He is a senior here at the University of Notre Dame, and his interests include the intersection of social values with educational frameworks, among many other things. Finally, Kevin McDonald will tie things up for us. He joins us from St. Mary's College, where he teaches courses in ethics and ancient and medieval philosophy, though his special love is biomedical ethics. Okay, we will turn it over to Dr. Perlstadt. I'll get this running for you. Oh,
okay, we'll do this really quick, just to give you some background information on the medicalization of ADHD, which within sociology is almost the primary case study for medicalization. I would like to start with, however, a couple of basic definitions or distinctions. One is disease, which basically is has a known specific cause or causes. Hepatitis B virus, H1N5 or N5H1, whatever. We know what it is, we can find it, we can test for it. It has an etiology, and it is identified by tests and examination. The other term that's sort of like disease, but a little bit different, is illness. Illness is a person's perception of their health, whether or not they in fact have a disease, and is indicated by signs or symptoms. Last week I had a bad cough and the runs. I suppose that was the one-day flu. I don't know. I didn't get tested. I just felt sick and went through life some other way. And so that's one end. We have a set of symptoms. We treat them at home or some other way. We don't get it diagnosed, and that's it. On the other hand, of course, the other extreme is malingerers who believe they're sick, and in fact, we can never find anything that's wrong with them. The other two terms I think we should be familiar with are the difference between syndrome, or definition of syndrome, and disorder. A syndrome is a collection of signs or symptoms, that is, it comes things out of illness and perception, that occur together. And it's a medical construction because it usually has an unknown etiology. That is, if it had an etiology, it would probably easily be a disease, but since there's a collection of these symptoms and signs, and we can't really find a single or primary cause, it becomes a syndrome. Then the thing that we're basically interested in this afternoon is disorder. I can send you the slides on this, just email me. Disorder is an abnormal and excessive reaction to an identifiable life stressor. compared with what would normally be expected. So we have, and I've named a few, eating disorder, sleeping disorder, mathematical disorder, gender identity disorder, and the one of interest of us, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. We've been talking about medicalization for the last day and a half. It's the idea that more and more components of people's personal lives are controlled by medicine, rather than traditional institutions such as religion or legal codes. And some of the debates and questions have sort of hinged on that and on the relationship between medicine on one hand and what belongs to religion or legal codes on the other, whether criminality or morality, things like that. What is healthy and ill are applied to an expanding array of social and personal problems. And then we have the concept of the therapeutic state. The power of medicine extends to areas which are considered non-medical, or at one time were considered non-medical. Alcoholism was originally a moral issue. Abnormal behavior, anxiety, and stress. What causes medicalization? And again, we've talked about this and heard about it. The growth in medical knowledge and competence and technology. The expanding domain of psychiatry, and particularly the doctoring of the psyche. The desire for medical practice to move beyond therapy, and that's, of course, a phrase from the report, to improving our lot in life. And also the increasing compassion for victims, even if victimized by their own foolish conduct. And I think part of the thing that we have to realize is that we're much less callous as a society than we used to be, or that the Romans were, or the medieval people were. And so this whole idea of compassion for victims and trying to do something and help them also gets us into medicalization. Okay, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, diagnostic labeling. Children who displayed a variety of behaviors, and I've listed just a few: squirming when seated, having troubles doing quiet activities, learning out answers before questions are finished, having trouble waiting for a turn. I think all three leading characters in Harry Potter exhibit these kinds of things. Hermione can't sit still, she raises her hand. Ron can't keep his eyes on things. Anyway, are viewed as troublemaking, lazy, or disobedient. Well, in fact, I guess that's the way they were once too. And then the interesting thing is a history of the medicalized description of these. In the early 1900s, these kinds of symptoms were described as morbid defects in moral care control. That there was a moral aspect to it. In the 1920s, it became restlessness syndrome. Then in the 1940s, brain injured syndrome, although apparently there's been no hard evidence of actual brain injury in these. It then got changed to minimal brain dysfunction in the 1950s and 60s, hyperkinetic reaction disorder in the 1960s and 70s, and finally attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in the 1980s until today. Ritalin was synthesized in the 1950s and received FDA approval in 1961. It has many of the qualities of amphetamine, speed, and it paradoxically slows kids down and speeds adults up. My wife had to explain to me why on Desperate Housewives the Felicity Huffman character suddenly had all her Ritalin to keep her going on her job. Then, yesterday, remember, Dr. Elliott talked about the ad campaign where they sent out all these things, all the drugs to the various doctors. This is basically what was in the handout. A headline that said, medical myth or diagnostic, hello? Okay. Sorry, I lost my screen here. All right, okay. Medical myth or diagnosable disease. In the absence of any organic pathology, condition of such children was until a few years ago in the early 70s usually dismissed. But it is now evident that hyperkinesis syndrome exists as a distinct medical entity which can be diagnosed through patient history, neurological signs, and psychometric testing. That is, they tried to lay out some ways of finding out about this. And, most important, has been classified by an expert panel convened by Health and Human Services as minimal brain dysfunction. Okay, I'm sort of enamored of Thomas Zaz, an MD. He wrote the book on the therapeutic state. He's a psychiatrist, but thinks out of the box a lot. And so on the ADHD syndrome, he said, the epidemic, in his view, doesn't exist. No one is able to diagnose it with objective tests, and all the tests you saw before were sort of subjective in some ways. It's diagnosed by a teacher complaining or a parent complaining. People are referring to the fact that they don't like misbehaving children, mainly boys in school. The diagnosis helps tranquilize the parent and tranquilize the school system, in addition, of course, to tranquilizing the kid. It offers them the sense that they are doing something about the problem. People want to do things about problems. That they are dealing with it in a rational, scientific way, and his conclusion is it's a kind of pharmacological magic. Okay, I don't think I added much, but I hope I've kind of summarized some of the things that we've talked about and laid the groundwork for the rest of the presentations and the discussion. Okay. Okay, it's you, right?
Alright, I guess as you know, I'm Sherry Halpern from Penn, and I'll get started, but the two pieces of advice that our captain gave me in preparation for the short 5 to 7 minute extended introduction were 1, to start off with a joke, and 2, to keep it to 2 to 3 points. And in light of Dr. Munia's joke at lunch, I really don't think I can follow that, so unfortunately don't have a great joke for you, but I will try and keep it simple, 2 to 3 points, and also in the interest of saving a lot of time for question and answers, because I know that this is a topic about which a lot of us feel strongly. So instead of a joke, though, I will start with a quote, because a good friend of mine recently, at age 22, a senior at Penn, was diagnosed with ADD, and it's pretty late to be diagnosed. And I just found this quote to be pretty interesting when she said this without microbing her at all. The day I was diagnosed with ADD, my whole life made sense. And I found this sort of interesting because we always hear this, I'm now my real self, and I now feel, just like a more true version of myself and more functional and everything. But this whole retroactive perspective that she offered was really interesting to me, that she kind of looked back and evaluated her childhood and her study habits and the way she went through school, even though she clearly overcame a lot of her troubles and was able to get to Penn and excel until now. But it was really empowering for her, I think, to have that explanation, to sort of externalize the problem. But at the same time, I don't necessarily feel that what she was diagnosed with was really ADD, and I don't necessarily know that ADD in itself is a learning disability or something that would warrant her having extended time on exams. And various other things, just in light of her performance up until this point. And I think that she does realize that it's important to maintain some responsibility for herself and her actions and her behaviors in the classroom and outside. But I just wanted to kind of use that as a little insight into my exploration of the responses to ADD in schools, because that's what's of most personal interest to me. I'm going to be teaching special ed next year in New York, and to be honest, I'm still learning very much about how different school districts react to students with learning disabilities. And I know that we're going to focus on ADD in this talk, but I just kind of want to put it out there that it is sort of contentious whether or not ADD really is a learning disability. It's often studied in connection with learning disabilities, but it's not always actually included in the standard definition of learning disabilities. And while a person with ADD struggles with learning, he or she is not necessarily learning disabled, although in a lot of cases it is legitimate, and I'll give you that, and we can all decide for ourselves as we hear the rest of the panelists. But a little glance at what I'll get into, some of this I just mentioned, but first of all, the plight of learning disabilities in schools. It's pretty much across the board. I think that there's and in my section of the panel, public versus private, and that leads a little bit to the personal innuendos versus public conceptions of the learning disabilities, but more explicitly public versus private schools, and how there is quite an achievement gap between inner city urban public schools and suburban and private schools in reactions to students with learning disabilities and just the ability to provide individual attention in schools. So I've worked with West Philly schools through my 4 years at Penn, as well as kind of speaking from some experience, I went to a private school in Washington, D.C., which, and I was provided with vision therapy and other, I've never been medicated, but I do have a learning disability. Not just, let's say, but similar to it, and I think that that's another learning disability that, you can kind of compare ADD against when we're trying to figure out exactly where it lies on the scale. Okay, so the next thing I'll go through is a crucial distinction in current responses to learning disabilities such as ADD, and then finally I'll continue with some important concerns regarding enhancement and potential overdiagnosis of ADD. Okay, so challenges facing public education. I just alluded a little bit, but financial pressures on school districts are really prevalent in a lot of cases where we see huge percentages being diagnosed, or percentages of students being diagnosed, especially in elementary and middle schools. Increased class size and student-to-teacher ratios are just indicative of the fact that students are not going to get individual attention, or not as much. So, and also these financial pressures lead to special ed programs that are just conspicuously underfunded, and really, even when you have well-intended teachers, they just don't have the means to reach the students on an adequate basis. And then the easiest apparent solution seems to indicate, as Dr. Paulstead has kind of started our panel with the theme of medicalization. So the crucial distinction I mentioned is that there's a difference between A, using drugs such as Ritalin or Adderall to treat a disease or disorder, and B, using such drugs to manipulate performance in school. The two key forms of manipulation are, one, according to the first, drug serve as a tool of management for teachers, characteristic of urban public schools, which I mentioned. A lot of times, since these classes are so large, it's really hard for teachers to command control over the classroom, and a lot of times it's not the fault of the students. It really is just an inability of the teacher to manage such a large classroom. And so, again, the easy solution is to kind of jump to medicalize the situation instead of kind of looking at more social and environmental systemic issues that are, really pertinent in this case. And then the second form of manipulation is, I think, the one that we'll have a lot more to talk about, is that they serve to sort of give Johnny an edge, as a very beloved advisor of mine, Paul Wolpe, would call it. It's characteristic of suburban prep schools. Parents just want to push their kids to do just a little bit better on those standardized tests, to get a slightly higher GPA, to get into the good schools. And I mean, we're all undergrads here. We know what it took to get here, and we know the pressures that come into play. But competitive academic environment for me has just been something that drew my attention to and question ADD and how we react to it. So, and I use the word manipulation there deliberately because it's not always enhancement. I don't want to confuse the terms, but it kind of leads right into the question of enhancement, which we've been talking about in almost all of our sessions, if not explicitly, then implicitly. I'll be quick. So the three kind of ways that I saw that people try and use ADD or other learning disabilities to get that edge is through standardized tests, but getting it one extended time, other accommodations such as enlarged print, which is, I mean, a lot, the other accommodations are usually for much more kind of tangible learning disabilities where there's a, whether it's a visual problem where you need larger text or a computer, when you have trouble writing, that sort of thing. But there are those other accommodations that can, potentially improve your score. And then prep classes, which I think a lot of times we don't view as an enhancement technology, but it really can serve as another way to view boost. And there's still, a question of access, and not everyone can afford the classes, just as not everyone gets the drugs or gets extended time or has the individualized attention on the part of teachers and schools. So, important concerns for the future regarding enhancement. We might soon readily access effective memory and other enhancing drugs. So I think that we need to keep that in mind, that this is, it's not just the say all end all, but if the trend continues, like we might be, even if we don't find ourselves really at issue with students having access to Adderall and other drugs now, I mean, it's just sort of the slippery slope argument that we might want to consider. And then some parents will inevitably push these other potentially memory enhancing drugs drugs on their kids, especially in these relatively competitive academic environments, which I alluded to are in a lot of cases private schools, but not exclusively. And I know that in a lot of these schools, due to these pressures, and I know I mentioned the issue of coercion earlier, up to a quarter of a graduating class will be granted extended time on the SAT, which to me doesn't really, that's bordering on the normality concept. And I think that as we continue our discussion, we're going to want to focus on some of these arguments against enhancement, as well as potentially defending the current situation. But just to keep in mind, alteration of self or personhood, the idea that we need to maintain justice, and that if one person gets it, why shouldn't everyone? And I think that this sort of push to create disability is epitomized in Kurt Vonnegut's The Sirens of Titan. Everyone sort of creates a disability to then affect equality demands, so there's really no, that we just kind of shift normal. And I think that I want to leave you guys with that so we can move on. But just this idea of enhancement to the point where we're going outside of the bounds of what we're already able to do. It's one thing to kind of, push along the lines of the affirmative action argument up to even at the playing field, and it's another to kind of shift the entire discipline. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Emily. And then there's a little something. The three basically schools are under, but we want to keep that crucial distinction in mind, and then we want to keep reevaluating the motives that underlie the push.
I felt PowerPoint was an enhancement, so I didn't use it. Because I thought this was about non-enhancement. But in my 5 minutes, I'm going to quickly review some of the issues surrounding physician prescribing of ADHD medications to children, the potential long-term health consequences of taking these medications, and the potential consequences to society of raising children on Ritalin, all in 5 minutes. I'm going to be asking more questions than answering, but maybe you all can tackle some of these issues in our discussion. Before I begin, I want to state a couple caveats. First, I believe that ADHD is a real, treatable behavioral disorder that affects many children. I also believe that Ritalin, Adderall, and all the other stimulants that are prescribed work effectively to treat problems such as restlessness, lack of concentration, and focus in children with and without ADHD. Children who suffer from ADHD should receive the best available treatment, including stimulant medications when appropriate. I don't think all kids with ADHD need stimulant medications. But I also believe that ADHD is both over and underdiagnosed in different communities across the U.S., and this creates two different sets of problems. And finally, I'd like to disclose that I'm not a parent, and I don't know anything about what it's like to raise a child, but I do have a lot of sympathy for parents who are dealing with children who may have behavioral or other learning disorders. So first, what are some of the issues related to physician prescribing of ADHD meds to kids? In treating any child, physicians have several often competing ethical obligations. They're to act in the best interest of the child, while at the same time respecting the rights of the parents to make healthcare decisions for their child, and depending on the age of the child, respect the rights of the child to be heard and involved in their own healthcare decision making. So it's easy to do all those things, right? Right, doctors? Diagnosing ADHD can be very complicated, so these complicated diagnostic issues lead to complicated ethical issues. The diagnostic criteria are vague, as Dr. Perlstadt laid out. Inattentiveness, distractibility, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness, they're not well-defined behaviors. And these symptoms or behaviors exist separately and in varying degrees and severity in different children, and they're found in most normal children at one time or another, and they're always targets of potential correction, regardless of whether the child has ADHD or they're just a kid who's having a bad day or a kid who is a little cranky. There's no definitive biological marker or psychological test for ADHD, so a physician has to rely on observed and reported symptoms, generally reports from parents and teachers. This makes it difficult for a physician to distinguish between a child with ADHD and a child who's unruly, undisciplined, or just plain difficult. Human behavior is transitory and its causes are ambiguous. It's extremely difficult to identify the exact source of a child's particular unpleasant behavior. Behaviors thought to be symptoms of ADD may sometimes mask other problems, such as an abusive or neglectful home environment, a suboptimal learning environment, as Sherry mentioned, or depression or other psychological or medical disorders. And disruptive behavior may also be a child's way of trying to communicate grief, sadness, frustration, or other emotional states that are normal parts of childhood, normal parts of life. Often physicians don't have an adequate time in which to make a diagnosis, while parents might be in a hurry to find a solution. They may want to avoid the stigma of their child being held back in school, having poor grades, or being put in remedial classes. Or a parent might find that a diagnosis of ADHD is the only way to get extra help for their struggling child because it qualifies them for special programs in school. School administrators and teachers might be applying pressure, and some parents may even feel morally obligated to try a stimulant medication because they're available, therefore ought we do it. All these factors may lead to problems of over and underdiagnosis, over or under medication, and ultimately inadequate treatment of patients with and without ADHD. So how does a physician act in the best interests of the child in such a complex situation? And who defines the best interests of the child? Parents, teachers, doctors, social workers, judges. How does a physician handle a parent who's overly insistent that their child does have ADD and needs medication? And where do the child's own wishes fit in, especially with older children? Many choices for children, especially about medical treatment, are traditionally made by parents, but there are limits to how much you can coerce a child. And who represents and protects the child's right when a physician or other healthcare provider believes that a parent may not be making the best decision for the child? What if a child refuses to take a prescribed drug? Or what if a parent refuses to fill a much-needed prescription? These issues are ever present in pediatrics, but complicated diagnostic matters, local school politics, media coverage, and insufficient data about drug safety make the treatment of patients who have ADD and the treatment of patients who may have ADD especially challenging. My second point, very little is known about the potential long-term health consequences of the stimulant medications used to treat ADHD. There are reasons to believe, both scientific and intuitive, that drugs can do damage to the body or brain of a developing child. Most published studies of stimulant medications follow patients for only a short period of time, and these report few immediate adverse health effects. Because of this, ADHD medications appear to be very safe and also non-addictive. Furthermore, these medications work to decrease the symptoms of ADHD immediately and therefore result in parent satisfaction, solving problems, doing something, fixing the problem. It's also been argued that prescribing stimulant medications for ADHD in childhood decreases the likelihood of future drug abuse, future self-medication, and that's something that, in this war against drugs, we all can get behind. However, there's been some criticism that short-term studies have overlooked certain adverse side effects of stimulant medications. In February, prompted by reports of deaths and serious cardiovascular problems, including heart attacks and strokes, an FDA advisory panel recommended that a black box warning be put on all drugs used to treat ADHD. This is the most severe warning possible for prescription medications. And up to this point, I believe only Adderall carried the warning, and now Ritalin and all the other ones, the FDA panel recommended that they should carry this same warning. More data from long-term studies are needed in order to investigate the potential effects of long-term use of stimulant medications. And I personally believe that long-term follow-up should be required for all children on stimulant medications as a condition of treatment, since so little is known right now. Potential psychological and emotional effects of long-term use of Ritalin and other ADHD drugs should also be studied. Even if the drug is proven safe, and even when a family's physician and family believe the use of a drug is necessary or no big deal, the fact of being on medication may lead to certain feelings of inadequacy. Despite the growing acceptability of psychiatry, despite what Tom Cruise has to say, and enhancement technologies, am I the only one that reads Us Weekly religiously? There's still a strong cultural belief that it's better to cope by digging deep and using your own inner strengths than resorting to medication. And this is another interesting tension in society right now. We have this reliance on enhancement, but yet still there's this old American dream, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, doing it for yourself, and those things exist in great tension. Teenagers are especially sensitive when it comes to issues of identity, and questions like, did you take your pill today? Why are you behaving like this? Did you remember to take your medicine? Can really undermine a child's confidence and feelings of self-worth. So lastly, regarding the potential societal consequences of raising kids on Ritalin, I have many speculations, but no hard data. I've come up with several questions to pose to you, and these draw heavily from the President's Council's report, Beyond Therapy, which is a great book, and if you're interested in the stuff we've been talking about at this conference, I recommend read it. And Dr. McHugh didn't give me money to say that. I'm saying that all on my own. So first, how should the desire for well-behaved children be understood, and what are the appropriate means of acting on that desire? It seems natural for parents to desire a child who's well-adjusted, attentive, and high-performing, but there's a difference between the desire to heal a disease and the desire to achieve improvements in behavior and performance above and beyond normal. And so second, aren't restlessness, rambunctiousness, and other undesirable behaviors simply natural characteristics of childhood? And I'd say natural for boys and girls. Will curbing such behaviors stifle childhood? Do drugs that intervene directly with a child's neurochemistry change their will and therefore change their personality? Does changing behavior mean essentially changing identity? Third, if hyperactivity, impulsiveness, and distractibility aren't naturally present in all children, are we helping children when we diagnose them with ADHD, helping children who have these characteristics when we diagnose them, or are we ignoring natural differences among children and treating different children as problems? Now that we have unprecedented power to enhance people to a certain standard, is our openness to human flourishing and human difference diminishing? Or instead, do drugs offer us new opportunities to instead increase our diversity? Fourth, does the problem of ADHD have roots and therefore solutions in social and environmental factors? If so, should we be using a biological fix? Well, as I said earlier, I do believe that ADHD is a real disease. The rise in diagnosis and stimulant prescriptions may reflect how the demands on children and families have increased, while at the same time social support has declined. When behavior is viewed as genetically or neurologically based, it is more acceptable to use medication to change that behavior when it's desirable. Such a deterministic view of behavior can eclipse other options for treatment or decrease scrutiny of the social environment and may permit a poor condition to continue or worsen. Does the fact that a biological fix exists lead physicians and parents to fail to consider other reasonable explanations for ADHD-like behavioral symptoms? Or to put it more bluntly, should dysfunctional family patterns and overcrowded classrooms be tolerated simply because Ritalin improves a child's behavior and performance within that environment? Quickly and without dangerous side effects, at least that we know of. Fifth, do bioreductionist interpretations of ADHD-like behavior lead us to attribute less power to free will and individual choice? As I mentioned earlier, the view of certain undesirable behaviors as disease treatable by medication conflicts with our cultural emphasis on accountability and responsibility. Most children, including those with and without ADHD, whose behavior is unruly and restless, can and do learn to behave better through discipline, practice, and maturity. Building abilities over time through study and practice is an important learning process, important through a lifetime and primarily cultivated during childhood and adolescence. Does this process matter? How is the use of drugs that work directly on the brain to improve children's behavior different than other methods of child rearing and education? In using pills, are we leaving something out? Are we teaching kids that responsibility for actions can be placed upon pills? And how will this affect these children's future choices regarding performance-enhancing technologies? And lastly, but not least, what about fairness and justice? Though medicating certain individuals so they can function better may seem like a doctor-patient issue, are doctors unintentionally promoting a competitive environment that demands performance at any cost, even for young children? The availability of stimulants and stories of success lead some parents to at least consider their use in helping their children do better in school. Why deny your child an opportunity if other people's children are already using similar drugs for similar purposes? As more children and adults use Ritalin to improve performance at school or at work, will those who are struggling to perform feel pressure to consider medication in order to keep up? Children from previous generations, including my generation, who are overprescribed antibiotics have now grown into adults who have difficulty fighting infections. I truly hope that we do not end up with future generations of kids raised on Ritalin who can't fight the challenges of adulthood.
All right. I was making mental note as she went through everything, and as all of our speakers went through everything, of all the things I don't need to talk about here. So I'm going to be sort of reconstructing what I go through as I talk. Emily brought up an interesting point, the question rather, of whether or not having these biological solutions available leads us to stop considering other options. And I think maybe going along with what Dr. Elliott was talking about yesterday, we can even question more deeply if having these biological solutions toted to us makes us believe that there's a problem in the first place. I'm rather interested in the idea of how attention deficit hyperactivity disorder could be considered a social construct. And I'm not claiming that the disease doesn't exist, that there is no disorder, that there's no one suffering. But I think we have to admit that there is something inherently constructed about a disorder. Dr. Krolstad put up on the board earlier this slide with the word disorder and definition of it and all those things. I think that that was instructive. And I think you can go even a step further and realize that to have a concept of disorder, you have to have a concept of order. And to have a concept of order, you have to have some sort of normative construction of what it is to function properly as a person, as a child, as whoever. And so there is definitely some social aspect to defining the disease that's going on there. And that needs to be taken into consideration. And I think Deidre McQuaid this morning made an excellent point about why that is. Because once you've defined something, everything else that follows is contextualized within that definition. So it's important to be clear about what sorts of assumptions are going into the definition itself. So what sort of assumptions do seem to be going on in our definition of this disorder and our choice of Ritalin and other things to solve it? Well, it seems like there's clearly an issue of intellectual production, we can say. We've been talking about it in the context of schools a lot. And so parents and students sometimes themselves want to be able to produce and compete in this intellectual environment. Well, at the base then, we're talking about some sort of production. We want to be able to compete productively. And that at its base seems to me to be heavily influenced by a capitalist worldview, an idea of how we can maximize our production and minimize the cost to making our production possible. Beyond this, I think that you can also see an aspect of defining these elements based on a desire to have the ability to fit in socially. We see that a lot, and as a matter of fact, our last speaker, Dr. Colbert, mentioned that as well, when he was talking about the desire to select for intelligence and social characteristics. So the idea that we want to select for people who are going to fit into that ideal, that image that the media has portrayed to us on every single page of every magazine you ever open, of this is what a good person looks like, and this is how they interact, and aren't they natural and fun and always happy? Turn on Friends, we should all be like that, right? That's the image that we have there. And so this all leads to a desire for some sort of quick fix, which goes again with this concept of an economic construct here. We don't want the long version of fixing the problem, as Emily was telling us. We're very tempted by this biophysical solution. And what could be accounting for that temptation might at least be in some part a desire to minimize the amount of time and energy expended in solving the problem, so to speak, and maximizing the output. We want to get to that model right away. And I think that this raises for me one very serious prima facie ethical problem, and that's that we're valuing children and persons in general based on their secondary attributes, these attributes of productivity, these attributes of social normality, and other things of that sort. And I think at its very base, we have to question whether or not that's really valuing a person as a person. Because if it's not, I think, and you don't need to have a religious perspective in order to buy this sort of an argument, I think you can look through a Kantian sort of categorical imperative if you want to, and see that if a person is indeed an ends and not a means, then we have to be valuing that person as an ends. And if we're not doing that, then it seems that there's been some sort of prima facie error in our ethics of treatment there. And so, shouldn't we be considering other things in terms of our children? Shouldn't we be more concerned about their happiness, their ability to have joy, to create, and to flourish in all of those different senses of the word? I mean, that seems to me where we need to really be focusing our consideration of whether or not there's a disorder in a child or in any person. So, and of course, the corollary to that is that if there is some sort of biological misfunctioning in a person's brain that's preventing them from flourishing, from being happy, from being able to have joy, well then yes, that would be a disorder. So that's why I say I'm not denying the existence of the disorder. I just question perhaps some of the ways in which we define it. And ultimately then, I think that I just want to tack on something at the end of Dr. Colbert's speech. He brought up this question of, this raises the question for our future. How are we going to react when we have the ability to start choosing for all of these different options, selecting for intelligence, selecting for social characteristics? And I think that there's a frightening reality that we can learn from here when we look at the way that ADHD has been treated with Ritalin and other things today, that already in the status quo, people who have the option to select for how their children are going to behave are already choosing to use that power in order to make their children into the model that they envision for that. And we have to question whether or not that's a good thing, I think, in the end of the day.
In my misspent youth, there was a magazine named Playboy. Its editor and publisher, Hugh Hefner, apparently in an attempt to raise the tone of the magazine, published a series of articles titled The Playboy Philosophy. The series was made available, free but without centerfold, to college professors for use in class discussions. This is not a joke. Harvey Cox, then a professor at Harvard's Divinity School, wrote a response to Hefner's articles in which he accused the Playboy philosophy of Puritanism. Puritanism? Cox noted that given the large families characteristic of Puritan towns, it could hardly be said that the Puritans were anti-sex. The problem with Puritanism is that it makes everything a person does good for something else. It sucks all the intrinsic, inherent value out of things. We have sex to have children. We have children to build the city of God. Cox made the argument that the Playboy philosophy is that we should have sex because it is good for us. It lowers blood pressure, releases tension, resolves inner conflict. It's just another form of Puritanism. And this, I want to argue, is the problem with enhancement. It is just the latest outbreak of the Puritan mentality on which so much of our culture is founded, and so much of our present here on a beautiful afternoon is based. There are genuine diseases, as everybody has said, dysfunctions of the human brain, reproductive system, eyesight, and other human abilities that can be medically ameliorated. I would be a lot worse off without my eyeglasses. But it's plain from the many examples already discussed in the conference that we're way beyond such simple amelioration now. To what effect? Ritalin is said to boost SAT scores. So someone gets into the college of her choice. And what does she do there? Buffs her resume and pops more stimulants to boost her MCAT score, by which she gets into a highly ranked medical school, which is required for the very best residency program that admits her to the most prestigious fellowship that opens the door to the finest appointment in academic medicine, during which she frets about tenure. Every so often in her medical career, particularly in the first year of residency, she's had to deal with patients. And what does she find? They're sick. They're really sick. But by the way, let me just interject that it's a privilege of medical education in comparison with either law or business or graduate work in philosophy, that medical residents actually come face to face at some stage of their career with really poor and really sick people. It's a wonderful privilege of medical education, something those of you going on in medicine should absolutely look forward to. But now, back to our almost tenured, perhaps almost pregnant, perhaps one more try with the latest infertility treatment, almost middle-aged heroine. Her whole life has been led by her future and frenzied attempts to prepare herself for it. What have all the stimulants, orthodontics, fertility treatments, and so on brought her? Cosmetic surgery. In all of the wonderful opportunities offered to her in her undergraduate and graduate education, she has savored not a one of them. Physics was something to be gotten out of the way. Orgo was a hurdle to be vaulted. The world of physical, chemical, or biological nature had no intrinsic interest. You just have to know a lot of that stuff to get into medical school. She's always been looking to the future, like a good Puritan, offering up the present to something higher. I am offering here a caricature. I think it's a little bit true of all of us, not just of the youngest people in this audience. It may well be an inheritance from our historical Puritans, our cultural forebears. One of the frustrations of the conference so far, and of every other medical ethics conference I've ever attended, is the failure to find a solution to the problem. What shall we do about fill in the blank. How can we resolve whatever it is we're talking about? I have a solution. Not the solution, for there are no silver bullets, no one small group of things to wipe Puritanism away. I agree with Dr. McHugh that we need to turn to the poets. Not to the tragic poets on McHugh's list, the depressing Solzhenitsyn, but to the comedic poets. Humus, the earth, human, and humor are all connected. My hero today is Sir Toby Belch. In Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, the orotund Sir Toby confronts the Puritan Malvolio, saying, "Dost thou think that because thou art virtuous, there shall be no more cakes and ale?" I suggest that we have to learn to savor the cakes and ale of the present moment. The real ale, as they say in Britain, not Bud Light. I say this because I think that savoring the present now may be a good predictor for saving the future as that comes. I welcome Dr. Winnia's remarks on humans and humor. When Bernie Ebbers steals a couple of $1 million from his company to throw his wife a toga party in Rome, after we indict him, we ought to laugh at him. When the Vice President of the United States goes quail hunting, or tries to spell potato, it ought to be covered by Comedy Central. Now, I don't propose to laugh at sick people or at those acutely suffering from their perfectionism. But we need to recognize that perfectionism is a culturally self-inflicted disease. So let us start where most of us are now, in higher education, and laugh a little about how we got here. I brought a book along. Unfortunately, it's not one I wrote. It's titled Toilet Train for Yale. And I was really pleased earlier to find that there's no one from Connecticut, much less New Haven, here. The author is Richard Schoenstein, and he was a writer for The Cosby Show. And I'd like to read just a couple of short selections from the book. At 9 o'clock one Monday morning at the YWCA of Princeton, New Jersey, I attended a class of America's youngest students, the ones enrolled in a course called Creepy Crawlers. As a student at college, I had taken a CC because contemporary civilization was required. At the YWCA, this CC was also required, but as a prerequisite for Fun for Ones, whose credits then enabled the student to move on to Gemantics, which launched the student on a 16-year-old flight toward the university down the road. The students in the YWCA's Creepy Crawlers seemed cheerfully relaxed, except for the two who were screaming. But at every school, certain students are unhappy to have morning classes. It's important for the mothers to be there, because each of them had her eyes on the prize and her foot on the accelerator. Each of them felt that the moment an American child is born, he cries out, not just for milk, but for enrichment, enhancement, and early enrollment. And some of them might even have known about the Newsweek report of a study revealing that breastfed babies had IQs approximately 8 points higher than the bottle-fed ones. Suddenly, however, when I saw the students placed in a circle before the young female teacher, I was struck by the folly of rushing childhood instead of slowly savoring it and trying to make it last. The folly of trying to aid that cruel enemy, time. The poet, Andrew Marvell, had written of Time's winged chariot, and since the moment I had made the mistake of turning 60, I had wondered why time could not have avoided that chariot and taken a trolley car instead. Schoenstein begins his book with this little verse. A birdie with a yellow bill hopped upon the windowsill, cocked his shining eye and said, "Admissions just sent word, you're dead." Remember, Dante called it a commedia.
We now have time for Q&A for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Please step up to the mics and address your question to a specific panelist if you choose, or to the whole.
Hi, my name is Joe. The American diet is an interesting thing, and I want to know if there's been any correlations drawn between high fructose corn syrup, red 40, and perhaps the caffeine that is in the diets of these children and the grown-ups. Anybody?
Since no one's answering, I'll answer. I don't know. But one of my professors is an MD, and he calls sugar poison. And that's all I can tell you. But I know when my little sister was young and she had behavioral problems, changing diet was one of the first things that they recommended. And I know that diet changes are part of ADHD treatment.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Look for that.
I really thought the last two comments were really interesting, and especially one that I've been thinking about and working on. Interested that I think our culture, and I don't know how much of it, it kind of actually is interesting me for a loop, because I don't know how much of it is actually related to that we've screwed things up biologically and how we diet, but that we don't like kids. Everyone says they like kids. Everyone says, oh, kids are so cute. But no one actually is willing to put their money or any other form of valuable things to children. Anything that involves children in our society gets the shaft. It gets the bottom of the barrel and the last of our kind. So I don't know, that kind of just throw that out there for any of you that want to comment on that. But I think part of the real problem is that we have no interest in investing in children as people. I mean, as I commented earlier on the abortion earlier in the day, that we don't have interest in children as people. That once they're productive members of society, then we might care about them. But as a little person, we don't want to invest in them.
I disagree. I think in an odd way, and this is partly a class business as much as anything else, we overinvest, or maybe I should say we overinvest the wrong kinds of things. If you look at the income distribution in the country, the poorest people in the country are children, and the richest people of the country are geezers. And I look forward to your Social Security check coming in the mail very shortly. But in financial terms, I think you've got a very good point, and in talking about support for schools and so on. On the other hand, with smaller families, and especially with upper class families, the overinvestment, in my view, over-control, over-stimulation, that we've been talking about in terms of enhancement is a real problem. So we have, I think, a real class issue going on, and at least that's how I, as an amateur sociologist, see it.
The only thing I'll add is that you only have to wait till 2040 until the baby boomers are gone. The baby boomers, we preceded you all, hog everything. And at the moment we're hogging upper middle age and retirement. And there's another 20 to 30 years of us being the largest generation. Well, actually, I'm a little bit ahead of them. But after 2040, the world is yours, and I hope you do better. That's why you don't invest in children, because we're all investing in our retirement.
My question actually was a bit of a comment and something that hopefully sparks some commentary from the panel. We've been talking a lot about what I see as the school-centered society we're in, whereby, unlike the way our society may have been 100, 200 years ago, children are put into this school situation right away, and that's prioritized. You know, parents say school's the best thing, stay in school, that sort of thing, and that there's a stigmatization of the below average child. But, you know, run the numbers, we have lots of below average children because average is, well, average. So you're almost saying, well, you have to be better than most to be good enough. And that there seems to be a disappearance of, you know, the boy who turns into a man who works with his hands and tills the land, rather than the boy who turns into the man who sits in front of a textbook at age 25. And I wonder if maybe one way to turn society more towards channeling energy into different manners would be maybe to point out career paths that aren't academia, maybe point out things that children can do, things that children can grow up into that aren't necessarily that standard sit down in front of a piece of paper if the child isn't really designed to be that kind of adult.
I really like that point, and I think it made me reflect on the fact that I've been to a lot of presentations by college admissions people, and I've never ever heard one of them not start their speech with the claim that last year's group of applicants was by far the best group of applicants they've ever seen in their lives. And of course, maybe they're exaggerating, I don't know. But it made me think, in relation to that it seems like we're constantly upping the bar of the level of absolute perfection we expect from people. And I don't know to what extent that can be correlated with images in the media, with images of success that are portrayed to us, and this idea that maybe it is possible for us to reach that dream, and so you have to in order to really be worth anything. I don't know, but that's my reflection on it.
You know, I think it's true. The question is what to do about it, and I'm afraid that I think we should laugh at people who buy into it, because I mean, you know, government regulation is not going to do it. I mean, I think we ought to laugh at a lot of government regulation. It's really pretty funny stuff.
I guess my question is, have they noticed an increase in the diagnosis of ADHD and ADD as we start cutting funding for programs such as recess, art programs, like extracurriculars? I mean, as sports and stuff starts to go down, are we seeing more kids that are being diagnosed? Is this as like a way to keep them from, you know, being able to go out, instead of being able to go out and exercise and get all that energy out of them?
Well, I don't know if there's any research done on the correlation, but I would imagine that cutting, as I said earlier, I made a comment to her at lunch, that can't be good for kids that are already restless, that the programs that allow release of energy and creativity are the programs that are being cut from schools. So that's one more, not to bash on schools, I know they have their problems too, but things like that can't help. Although on the other hand, there's a rise in competitive sports at young ages, which I think is really horrible for children to be on traveling soccer teams when they're 5 and things like that. So I don't know.
I guess I can follow up on that just a little bit, that, you know, you can't blame everything on the schools, because a lot of times the districts are held to a really tight policy, kind of just to, you know, continue functioning as a school on standardized tests. They need certain scores and that sort of thing. And I think that one way that they get around it is by kind of separating the people who are learning disabled or special ed or aren't going to perform well enough on the standardized test, to kind of put them in a different category so that they're not held against everyone else. But then you really have to focus on those that can perform at a certain level, and you have to kind of train to the test instead of teaching them these life skills, you know, which might incorporate planting in the garden and in the schoolyard instead of just playing basketball. I mean, who knows? There are a lot of potential, I think, alternative therapies there, but I think that, you know, it's kind of, we're getting ourselves in the cycle of like, we need to pass students even when they haven't learned enough to pass the grade. And I think that it's something that we can't just do by preaching to go farm or to go, you know, take a pill or anything. I think that it really is going to have to come in some sense from government regulations, as funny as they may be. I mean, that the schools need to stay, I mean, these people need to keep their jobs, and it's a hard balance to strike, and I'm trying to learn kind of really early on in my career how we can, you know, best advocate this. But I do think that there needs to be recess, there needs to be health education, there needs to be art, there needs to be this encouragement of other types of learning, and not just kind of reaching some standardized test level and, you know, and certifying teachers based on bubble tests. I won't go on a rant.
I'd actually just like to add to that, I think it's a misconception to think that recess isn't a process of learning in and of itself. I mean, whoever decided that, I think that I learned my best architectural lesson from building sand castles in the sand pit, because it all crumbles eventually.
Well, and in defense of schools, I think that parents and everyone else are putting so many expectations on schools. In Illinois, based on evidence that the brain is most receptive at age 3 or 4, Governor Bioethics has announced this universal preschool idea that since brains are so receptive at that age, that means all kids need to be in school at that time. That was just an interesting thing to me, that kids, you know, yeah, their brains are receptive at that age, why doesn't that mean mom and dad spend more time talking to them or give them more books? Why does it mean that they have to be in school? Why do we look to schools to do all of the education? And I think it has to do with the whole it takes a village thing. So in defense of schools, I wanted to say something not unkind about them.
A lot has been said about the over or misdiagnosis of ADD in children, but nothing's really been mentioned about the almost certain underdiagnosis in adults of ADHD. And I know that like a lot of these adults didn't have the opportunity for diagnosis when they were children because there's a lack of knowledge, and there's also kind of a stigma in the 70s and the 80s about Ritalin being bad. And I know now that there's certain reluctance in the medical community to diagnose adults with methylphenidate, and instead they receive antidepressants, which a lot of times aren't effective and don't treat the disorder. Can you comment on this reluctance in the medical community to treat adults with ADD and to diagnose them, juxtaposed with this massive overdiagnosis in children?
I'll talk a little bit, I don't know if I'm the best authority on the subject, but I'm just struck by that in light of Dr. Elliott's comments yesterday about students or children's reaction to taking a pill versus adults. And whereas a child might neglect to take them at a certain time and feel weird when they're taking them and not really understand why, an adult, feels, generally speaking, a little more effective and like a little more resolved with it. But I agree that it's actually the adults who would benefit most from the pills and less from these alternative therapies because they're just so far entrenched in their learning styles and their habits and that sort of thing. So I think that the alternative therapies are just not going to be as effective because they're, just because of the age. I don't really have an answer as to how we can resolve it, but I think that we do lack an incentive for adults to get tested for ADD because for students there's this clear incentive, or at least a coercion from their parents to do better on these tests and to get to the next stage of life, as Dr. McDonald, very eloquently portrayed in the hypothetical case, which I don't even think is so extreme, but I think that once you've already been settled in this sort of career path and a job that I just don't think that there is a sort of reason. I think that's the problem, is that being diagnosed with ADD is more of a response to a demand than an actual something that needs response. And that's why in my initial slide I put it in quotes as responses to ADD, because I report that ADD is perhaps the response to some other needs.
My understanding, and you might have different statistics from the literature, is that adult ADD diagnoses are growing even rapidly than diagnoses in children, and that the same phenomenon is mirrored. It just came a little bit later, and so I don't know if you have different statistics.
Right. I know there's a certain kind of rule that adults receive antidepressants first, and that often this isn't as effective, and it's kind of, you have to push harder to get on medication with stimulants.
Well, and I think it also has to do with the vagueness of the symptoms and the difficulty in diagnosis. The symptoms, distractibility, restlessness, those are symptoms of anxiety disorder, those are symptoms of depression, they're symptoms of normal life. So I don't know if it's just emergence of the disorder, it's a new disorder, but my understanding is that there are many adults, that the number of adults on Ritalin and Adderall and other drugs are rising rapidly.
Do any last panelists have any final comments on this? Okay, otherwise, sorry for those of you with microphones, we have to wrap this up. And join me in thanking our panelists. Now we invite Texas A&M up to the stage to give you a brief couple-minute rundown
name's Matthew Behrens. I'm from the University of Texas A&M. We're going to give a talk to you today on a program we're putting together, an international bioethics conference. But first, I thought I'd give you all a little information about our university because it's probably a little bit different than all y'all's universities. We're the only university to receive a land grant, a sea grant, and a space grant from the government. We're expanding to include a lot more different focuses in our studies. It was founded in 1876 to educate the children of Texas. Real simple goal there. We're still trying to do that. It's a public university. It has 46,000 students, 3,200 freshman chemistry students, 1,200 people taking Intro to Genetics, and 450 genetics and biochem majors. Specifically about the Bioethics Forum, we were formed in spring of 2001. We sponsored this 3 years ago. It was very, very productive. And also, I'm the chairman, and our faculty advisor is Dr. Weil. And here are our international conference co-chairs, Laura Lee Shanks and Catherine Mooney.
Hello, I'm going to speak to you a little bit today about the first International Bioethics Conference that we're hoping to hold in the summer of 2007, I'm sorry. The hosting facility will be the Texas A&M University Study Abroad Center in Santa Clara. The sponsoring universities right now are Texas A&M, and we would like any other help from other universities that wish to help in planning and hosting this. Like I said, it's going to be held in Santa Chiara, which is our international facility, in Castiglione, Florentine, Italy. And the official dates we just found out are July 5th through 7th of 2007. The purpose of this conference, we hope to, like this weekend, provide a forum for meeting and sharing of ideas of bioethics. But what we really hope to do is allow undergraduate students to unify bioethics ideas from the Americas and Eastern, Western, Central Europe. This is the first time this has ever been done. We're really excited about the outcome of this summer. The potential topics, they're not yet decided for sure, and we would really like input if anybody has any ideas, but we've been thinking about genetically modified crops, the cost of bioterrorism security, environmental protection, international pharmacology, and edible vaccines, and other things that relate to that area. So like I said, if anyone else has any other ideas or would like to help us with this conference, just come talk to us. We'd really appreciate your help.
Hi, I'm Catherine. I'm going to give you some quick facts about our campus in Castiglione. It's a 13th century Etruscan city, 1 hour by train from Florence and 30 kilometers from Assisi. Santa Clara was formerly a Catholic boarding school for girls, and it's currently the center for Texas A&M University Study Abroad, and it does hold up to 150 students. Right now, the only cost that we do have set is about $45 per day per person, and that's just going to include your housing and your meals and refreshments. The rooms will be about 2 to 3 people per room. And the proposed dates of the conference are July 5th through 7th. That corresponds with the time that European schools complete their sessions. And it does also integrate with semester sessions of the Study Abroad Center and Student Abroad Center. Emphasizes also the European cultural and that's all. If you have any questions, come talk to us. We don't have all the costs set aside. Like I said, this will be in summer of 2007. So if you have any questions, feel free to speak with us.
Howdy. My name is Paul Mack. I'm from Michigan State University. I'm the chair of the Undergraduate Bioethics Society at Michigan State. We started in 2003 after the, 2004, I'm sorry, after the conference at University of Michigan. Our group got together, formed an undergraduate organization at Michigan State. We'll be hosting the conference next year. We just wanted to give you a quick rundown of what we'll be talking about, what we'll be doing, so some things you can look forward to next year.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Wells, and I am the chair for the 10th Annual National Undergraduate Bioethics Conference that is to be held at Michigan State University. And first, we just wanted to let you know about the topic of next year's conference, and it is International Bioethics, New Frontiers and Emerging Issues. And it is to be held March 23rd to the 25th. And
we just spent some interesting time just trying to flesh out what we want to do for our conference. So I just thought I'd give you a run over of the topic itself, because the name can be a little, the title can be a little ambiguous. As I'm sure you guys have seen this weekend, I forgot to say, I wanted to thank NUBC9. You guys did a great job. Can we give them a hand, the people that organized it? Sorry, now I'm going. Bioethics is encountering an increasing array of very complex problems. You see societal, economic, agricultural, and environmental factors affecting human well-being and health. So we want to explore some of those issues. We see those as being international in scope, interdisciplinary in nature, complexly rooted, that is, they have causes that aren't simple, and enormous in their effect. They affect all of us, and they're important for all of us to think about. So just to give you an idea of some specific things that we're going to be focusing on, some issues of medical ethics connecting things that we've talked about this weekend perhaps to international issues and how we interact with, say, the third world, how we interact with Europe. So we're going to try to connect some of our domestic issues with what's going on in the rest of the world in medical ethics. Consider environmental ethics and how that affects health, resource allocation, sustainability, pollution, those kinds of things. Agricultural ethics, things like genetically modified organisms, small farm exodus, the fact that you have most food being produced on an industrial basis now. You don't have very many small farms or people that are connected to land. Food ethics, different things about preference, sensitivity, do we have to label food, and how food is produced, how it's gotten to people. And research ethics, how do we handle international research? What are the standards, should there be standards for both humans and animals? That's just a limited, quick look at topics, but that gives you an idea of the things that we want to talk about next year.
all right, our keynote speaker for the conference next year is Dr. Daniel Callahan, and he is co-founder of the Hastings Center, which is located in New York. And he is also the director of the international programs there. He is senior fellow at Harvard Medical School, and he is director of the ethics track. Okay, and next year's conference is going to be held at the MSU Union, which has 2 floors of meeting rooms and catering there. And it's very close to downtown. It's around a lot of shopping and food and has everything. The hotel that we are going to be putting people in is the Marriott Hotel, and it's located only 2 blocks away from the Union, and it has a special rate for 4 people per room, and also offers shuttle service to Lincoln Airport. Okay, and one thing I wanted to ask of any of you is if you guys have any comments or input for next year's conference, things that you'd like to see or anything, I put my email on here so you guys could email me your thoughts, and we'd really appreciate that.
The other thing is, just as Texas A&M said, we aren't looking to fly this solo. If you guys, any of this strikes an interest to you, or you have questions or ideas, you know faculty at your school that might be interested in speaking at this, we really want to hear from you too. So feel free to contact us. We don't have a website for the conference up at this point. That should hopefully be on the internet soon, and you'll be able to link to it from Undergraduate Bioethics Society, which is the website that you see there. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to talk to Lindsay or myself. And thank you. We hope to see you guys, all of you, next year.